There is a city in the Arabian desert that almost nobody outside the Gulf can place on a map, Al Ain, an oasis town in the United Arab Emirates, positioned close to the Omani border, surrounded by date palms and ancient fortresses, far from the glassed towers of Dubai and the political theater of Abu Dhabi. It is not the kind of place that makes the news, and that, of course, is precisely why it was chosen. At some point during an active shooting war, a war in which ballistic missiles were still arcing across the Gulf sky, the Israeli Prime Minister boarded a plane and flew to Al Ain. He sat across from the President of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. The meeting lasted several hours. When it ended, Netanyahu's office released a carefully worded statement describing it as a historic breakthrough in relations between the two countries. Reuters, citing sources with knowledge of the meeting, confirmed the location. The BBC reported the confirmation from Netanyahu's office directly. Nobody was supposed to know about this visit. That it became public at all tells you something important, not just about the meeting, but about what it represents, because the leaders of sovereign nations do not conduct secret wartime diplomacy in remote oasis cities for minor reasons. They do it when something fundamental is being decided, when the architecture of a region is being rearranged, and when they need the cover of anonymity to do what the public or their enemies are not yet ready to accept. To understand what was actually agreed in Al Ain and why it matters far beyond the Middle East, you have to understand the geography of power in the Gulf. The Persian Gulf is not merely a body of water. It is, as analysts at Foreign Affairs have described it for decades, the central artery of the global economy, roughly 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passes through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage at its mouth, barely 39 kilometers wide at its tightest point. Every supertanker bound for Europe, Asia, or America must pass through that strait. Control it, threaten it, or close it, and you hold a blade to the throat of the global economy. Iran has known this for 50 years. So has Washington. And so now does Abu Dhabi. The war that preceded Netanyahu's secret visit began in late February, when the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iranian territory. The strikes were, according to Western officials, targeted at Iran's nuclear infrastructure and missile production facilities. Tehran's response was ferocious. According to the UAE Ministry of Defense, Iranian forces launched 551 ballistic missiles, 29 cruise missiles, and over 2,265 drones at the Emirates during the course of the conflict. Read that number again: 551 ballistic missiles aimed at a country that 5 years ago had no formal military relationship with Israel at all. But what happened next is where the surface narrative breaks down. Because the Emirates did not break, it did not capitulate. Its air defenses significantly upgraded in recent years, and as it emerged, supplemented by Israeli Iron Dome batteries, absorbed the assault. The Wall Street Journal, citing sources it described as familiar with the operations, reported that the UAE had also conducted its own retaliatory strikes against Iran, including an attack on a refinery on Iran's Lavan Island in early April. The UAE has not publicly confirmed this. It has not denied it. That silence in diplomacy is itself a statement. And this is where the real strategy begins to appear. The Abraham Accords, the series of normalization agreements brokered by the Trump administration in 2020 between Israel and several Arab states, including the UAE, were described at the time as a commercial and diplomatic achievement, a historic peace, handshakes on the White House lawn. What the public was not told, and what analysts at War on the Rocks and similar publications had long suspected, was that the accords were also designed as the political foundation for something much more consequential: a joint security architecture aimed squarely at containing Iran, not through diplomacy, through military coordination, shared intelligence, and integrated air defense, the kind of architecture that, until this war, existed only in strategy papers and private conversations between generals. The deployment of Iron Dome batteries to UAE soil changes that equation permanently. This is not a commercial arms sale. Iron Dome is not shipped in a crate with a manual. It requires Israeli technicians, Israeli command and control software, real-time data links with Israeli military systems. What the way accepted onto its soil was not just hardware. It was Israeli military presence operational, active, and integrated during a live conflict with a shared enemy. US Ambassador Mike Huckabee described it publicly as the result of an extraordinary relationship between the two countries, rooted in the Abraham Accords. He was right. But the relationship he was describing had evolved far beyond anything the original signatories publicly acknowledged in 2020. Consider what this looks like from Tehran. For decades, the Islamic Republic's strategic doctrine rested on a specific calculation that Arab states in the Gulf are either too fractured, too dependent on oil revenues, or too wary of American entanglements to form a coherent military bloc against Iran. That calculation built into Iranian foreign policy, into its proxy network, into its missile deterrence theory has just been shattered. The Arab-Israeli military axis that Iran's leadership warned about for years, that it dismissed Western analysts for treating seriously, is now operational, and it held, under 551 ballistic missiles, it held. But what happens next changes the entire equation, because Iran's response to this strategic humiliation will not be passive. Analysts who track Iranian decision-making, including researchers at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, have noted a pattern that has repeated itself throughout the Islamic Republic's history. When conventional deterrence fails, Tehran pivots toward asymmetric escalation. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed as of this writing, a decision that Iran frames as a response to US Israel strikes, but which functions as economic warfare on the entire industrialized world. Oil prices have risen sharply since the blockade began. Every percentage point of increase in energy costs ripples through supply chains, through inflation figures, through the cost of living for ordinary families in Birmingham and Karachi, in Melbourne and Toronto. Iran is using geography as a weapon, and the choke point it controls is irreplaceable. Washington has responded with a blockade of Iranian ports. The logic is straightforward. Squeeze Iran's oil revenues, which fund both its military budget and its proxy network across the region, until Tehran agrees to terms. Iran sent its counter-proposal to Washington on Sunday. Trump's response was blunt. He called it totally unacceptable. A piece of garbage. The ceasefire that had nominally been in place for a month was, in Trump's own words, on massive life support. Iranian Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf responded that the armed forces were ready to respond and to teach a lesson for any aggression. These are not the words of two sides approaching compromise. These are the words of two sides determining the terms of the next phase. Ask yourself this. If the ceasefire collapses and the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, what does the global economy look like in 60 days? Not in geopolitical theory in your daily life, in fuel prices, in food costs, in the economic pressures that feed political instability across the democratic world. The geography of the Gulf is not abstract. It is the most consequential real estate on the planet, and the country that controls access to it right now is a government that has just absorbed confirmation of its worst strategic nightmare. Which brings us to the question very few Western commentators are asking: what does Iran do next? The experience of this war has revealed something deeply uncomfortable for Tehran's military establishment. Its ballistic missile arsenal, the crown jewel of Iranian deterrence, the capability that was supposed to make adversaries think twice before striking Iranian territory, has been publicly, comprehensively stress-tested. 551 missiles intercepted at scale. Yes, some got through. Yes, there was damage. But the strategic myth of Iranian missile power as an invincible deterrent has been exposed, and history tells us that states which lose conventional deterrence credibility face a stark fork in the road. They either accept a diminished position or they seek a new kind of deterrence that cannot be intercepted. There is only one weapon in that category, Western intelligence services, according to briefings cited by both the Financial Times and the BBC, have grown increasingly concerned that the combination of conventional military setbacks and strategic encirclement will accelerate Iran's nuclear calculus, not necessarily toward an immediate weapon, but toward a threshold position, the capability to assemble one quickly as a permanent deterrent against attack. It is the logic of North Korea applied to the Persian Gulf, and it is arguably the most dangerous long-term consequence of a conflict that Washington and Tel Aviv may believe they have already won. Meanwhile, the meeting in Al Ain did not happen in isolation. Around the Gulf, other calculations are shifting. Saudi Arabia, the largest Arab economy, the custodian of Islam's holiest sites, and a country that has been engaged in its own halting normalization dialogue with Israel, is watching this conflict with the attention it deserves. If the way can absorb an Iranian missile barrage, coordinate with Israeli air defenses, reportedly conduct covert strikes on Iranian infrastructure, and emerge with its political system intact and its relationship with Washington strengthened, that is a proof of concept Riyadh cannot ignore. The question of whether Saudi Arabia eventually joins this emerging military architecture, whether the Abraham Accords expand from a diplomatic framework into a Gulf-wide security alliance, is one of the most consequential geopolitical questions of the coming decade, and the answer, according to analysts familiar with Saudi strategic thinking, is moving faster than the public realizes. There is a historical parallel here worth sitting with. In the late 1940s, as the British Empire began its final withdrawal from the Middle East, it left behind a set of informal arrangements, base agreements, and intelligence relationships it believed would maintain regional order without requiring direct British military presence. It was wrong. The vacuum that followed the coups, the conflicts, the rise of pan-Arab nationalism, the oil crises reshaped the entire post-war world. America stepped into that vacuum and built its own architecture. Bases, alliances, petrodollar agreements, arms sales. That architecture sustained American primacy in the Gulf for 70 years. What this war represents: the secret visit to Al Ain, the Iron Dome deployment, the Emirati strikes on Iranian infrastructure, is not American withdrawal. It is American adaptation. Washington is no longer the sole guarantor of Gulf security. It is the senior partner in a distributed alliance. The question is whether that distributed alliance is more stable than what came before, or simply more fragile in ways nobody has yet mapped. The way's Anwar Gargash, one of the most careful foreign policy voices in Abu Dhabi, said publicly that his country remained committed to political solutions and diplomacy, while asserting the right to self-defense. He added, with measured phrasing, that Arab-Iranian relations in the Gulf cannot be built on confrontations and conflicts. That is the language of a country that knows it has crossed a threshold and is already thinking about how to manage the consequences. The way did not seek this war, it absorbed it, it survived it, and now it must live in its neighborhood permanently with a government in Tehran that has been humiliated, encircled, and is running out of conventional options. The most dangerous moment in a geopolitical contest is not when the stronger side wins. It is what comes in the silence afterward, when the losing side reassesses, recalibrates, and decides how far it is willing to go to restore the balance. Iran is in that silence right now. The Strait of Hormuz is its most immediate lever, but it is not the only one. Its network of proxies in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria remains intact, battered but functional. Its relationships with Russia and China, both of which have strategic reasons to resist American primacy in the Gulf, offer alternative lifelines, and its nuclear program, whatever remains of it after the initial US-Israel strikes, continues to exist as the ultimate insurance policy. None of this was supposed to become public. The visit to Al Ain was designed to be deniable. The Iron Dome deployment was a military arrangement, not an announcement. The reported Emirati strikes on Iran are still officially unacknowledged. The architecture being constructed in the Gulf, the one that will define regional security, For the next generation is being built in classified briefings and encrypted communications and remote desert cities by men who have decided the public can learn about it after the decisions are made. That is in itself a story worth understanding, because the world that emerges from this war, the new alignment of the Middle East, the expanded Abraham Accords security framework, the diminished Iranian deterrence, the nuclear question that nobody wants to answer out loud will shape the cost of energy, the stability of trade routes, and the architecture of global power for decades. The headlines will move on. The ceasefire will be declared or it won't. Statements will be issued and rejected and forgotten. But the visit to El Ain already happened. The Iron Dome is already there, and somewhere in Tehran, in rooms that no journalist has access to, the Islamic Republic's leadership is sitting with the same facts you now have and deciding what comes next. The question is not whether the Middle East has changed. It has irreversibly. The question is whether the architecture being quietly assembled to contain that change is strong enough to hold, or whether the pressures it has created will eventually produce a fracture far more dangerous than the war that started this entire sequence. History does not reward those who mistake the end of a battle for the end of a conflict, and the Strait of Hormuz is still closed.